Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to Water Tanks, and today I'm going to be discussing all about Onslaught, the good things, the bad things, and the downright ugly things about them. But before I jump into my presentation, I want to show everyone who has no idea what Onslaught is exactly what it looked like. So Onslaught is a game mode that's been going on for the last 45 days roughly, which is going to end on Sunday. It is a 7 versus 7 tier 10 only affair where vehicles have special abilities inside the game depending on their class. You can change what tank you want to play depending on what you think is going to work with the map, or alternatively, maybe with what you are planning with your allies. For example, a CS63 on our team didn't think it was a good idea to have two CS63s and that we should have a heavy tank instead. All of that is up for discussion. Then it's about trying to dominate the map by using all of the special abilities that you can pick up by controlling different areas. There's a cap circle in the middle that both teams are trying to cap, and then as we can see on the mini-map, there's an SPG command. There's two on this map, and then there's radio towers. The radio towers, when you claim them, will spot all of the enemy vehicles, which you might notice you can't actually see what they have until you actually manage to light them up. This, what we're going into here, is the other special ability. It's an SPG command. One player can pick it up, and then after they activate it, they can basically drop artillery in a specific part of the map. It's a one-use cooldown, but the artillery command actually comes back every couple of minutes. As we can see, there'll be a timer there, so we can go and pick it up and use it on later in the battle. But as you may know, when it's 7 versus 7 like this, the battles usually don't last very long. I'm hoping that my team is going to use the SPG command in the center to be able to damage some of those E100s to stop them from capping, because now, clearly, our 3 CS63s are going to be a tremendous advantage as we've managed to get an overwhelm here. What you saw there was not actually the SPG command. I don't believe that's the SPG was used. It's actually an ability that the CS63 has. It is called Fire Cover. And what it enables you to do is do 75, 150, or 225 damage, and enemies are stunned for 8, 12, or 16 seconds. And you actually see me dropping it in there on those two heavies, even though I'm not near them. And I managed to do 150 damage to each, and more importantly, I stunned them, which will hopefully allow that AMX M454 that's locked in combat with them to keep going. And that's what you see. You see now that we're actually getting stunning. I'm not sure if that's still in the random queue or whether Wargaming got rid of the stunning counter from the random queue. But for a while in the patch when Onslaught was released, you could see that you had a new indicator here, which was kind of annoying, showing stunning, which wasn't really very useful for the random queue, which you're not going to be doing unless you're artillery. So we can see just how much barrages we have here. Not quite able to get the Super Conqueror. Probably should have waited to level that one up, but the Super Conqueror also might have been healing. But I can just drop another barrage there on the Super Conqueror, finishing him off while also dealing with this E100. I set the E100 on fire, and now it's about trying to survive for long enough to be able to have those two heavy tanks come in. Luckily, they're out of the fight and their hit points are on the EBR, which doesn't really matter so much. It's more about getting the heavies. Hopefully their CS63 will come in and help me, and this is going to be a tricky scenario here. I'm hoping that both of those heavies commit. I'm hoping that the EBR and our team manages to force them to commit as well by getting up behind them. And those heavies are just in a horrible crossfire right now. So let's get some shots in. One artillery barrage goes up. That's going to stun both of those tanks. So that's going to stop them from being able to fight back effectively. And while they manage to shut down the E100 on our team, I'm not sure if I'm going to use this artillery barrage right now, because I'm hoping that I can be able to get it up to level 3. But in retrospect, it would have probably been better to drop a level 2. Now, you can't actually damage your allies inside this game mode, so you can just drop SPG commands on, or you can just drop your artillery barrages if you're a CS63. And unfortunately, we didn't quite roll high enough there to be able to finish off the IS-4. And that is Onslaught. This was one of the better games that I had yesterday while I was playing. I have very many games where I only put in 1 or 2 shells. This is just a cherry-picked game. But all in all, Onslaught, it has a series of ranks. You went from debutant through to iron, bronze, silver, gold, champion, and then there was legend rank as well. And within each of those divisions, you'll see that there were letters. There was A, B, C, and D. So there was a lot of different ranks to be able to climb up if you manage to. Now, just to say some of my pedigree inside this game mode, I never managed to get to the Legend rank. This was the first time I've actually ever played 7 versus 7 in World of Tanks, and so it's my first time with this affair. I managed to get to 1,600 rating, both on my main account and also on my free-to-play account as well, and that was using no premium consumables and hardly firing any gold rounds without playing an AMX M454 or a Super Conqueror once. I did have the CS63 and a 277, and I managed to make it work. Now, my history with regards to ranked in World of Tanks, sure, it's not 7 versus 7, is that I've managed to get gold every single season, at least on my main account, and managed to get gold on my free-to-play account in ranked multiple times as well. And now what I want to do today is to sum up all of my feelings, the good, the bad, and the ugly about Onslaught in a concise format, hopefully for feedback for Wargaming, and also to try and create some discussion in the comments down below. So firstly, let's talk about the good things about Onslaught. Firstly, it's different to the random queue. Variety is the spice of life after all, and it's just nice to have other game modes which can be fun to be able to spice things up a little bit inside the game. Secondly, the 7 versus 7 aspect of Onslaught made individual impact more significant. When there are only 6 other players on your team, that means that you're a greater percentage of the team, and so your individual skill and impact will actually enable you to win way more battles, as long as you're a good player and you're actually better than all of the other players inside the battle. And so this was quite refreshing. I'm not saying I'm the best player in World of Tanks, but I think I know how to tank at least occasionally a couple of games. And it was really fun for me to see where I was just clearly better than most of the players on the enemy team, and not able to just go and take on one tank, but also take on a couple of tanks, or if not more. Next, the elo system and the fact that you got matched up against players of your ranks was actually kind of fun to play with and against players of equal skill level. I never have played against so many players with 57 to up to 65% win ratios, and it was really fun to try and outsmart players like that, or to be able to just outplay them. There's nothing fun or spectacular about going in the random queue and stomping your way through 10 different players on the enemy team if they're all not very good. Maybe they don't have their tank set up correctly, maybe they don't have good crews, maybe they're just not taking the game seriously and playing it for a little bit of fun, or they're distracted, they're on their desktop, something like that. Inside Onslaught, you could be sure when you got towards the champion rank that the people that you were playing against were pretty sweaty. And so to be playing against players on a level playing field was a real fun thing in World of Tanks. And I can imagine it would also be fun for the real unconfident players in World of Tanks towards the lower end to be able to play against other players who make the same amount of mistakes as they do, and to be able to have more balanced games like that. Next, I want to talk about the tank picking. The fact that you could pick your vehicle depending on what map you went on or your team composition meant that you had an opportunity at least to always have a good team, and you also had an opportunity to have the perfect tank for the map. It wasn't a case of loading into it as an EBR on Himmelsdorf when you're playing in ranked, for example. This also, for the great players out there who are willing to be able to fulfill a role for the team, could be able to switch maybe from their favorite vehicle to something that they thought would just complement the way that the team was trying to set up. Next, I thought Fog of War was excellent. It was a lovely way to add some surprise to the battle and to enable, should we say, non-traditional tank setups to actually be impactful. For example, I got one shot a few times by FV4-005s inside this game mode. Very rarely, very, very rarely. I only saw them about maybe 4 times out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of battles that I fought, but it actually enabled that player to be able to create that ambush. If you could have seen that there was an FV4-005 on the enemy team, then you would have probably been a lot safer. And so that means that you can actually get those ambush shots to be able to outplay your opponent. And let's say, for example, you set up with a real fast team, you could be able to catch tanks and isolate them. Or if you had a real big, chunky, heavy setup, then the enemy team doesn't just try and play on the fringes, for example. Next, battles are shorter, which made bad games that you felt locked into with terrible allies less painful. You never really found yourself having to sit in, those games on Prokhorovka where the enemy team has now got a light tank and you have to sit there for 5 or 10 minutes trying to milk out as much damage as you possibly can to possibly not lose a chevron like you would in other games of ranked. Inside this game mode, you could probably just risk it and possibly try and win, because what do you have to lose at the end of the day anyway if the game is only a few minutes long and you've got to play hundreds of battles? Which brings me to my final point of what was good about it. The winners win and the losers lose points. Chevrons were gone from this system if you played ranked. They used to be awarded sometimes to even the losing team if you were the number 1 player. Inside Onslaught, every player on the losing team lost points, and every player on the winning team, irrelevant if they did absolutely nothing inside the battle, also gained points. And I think this meant that players were playing less selfishly and they were playing more for the team. However, it definitely wasn't a perfect system with regards to that, and that is because people were finding ways of kind of inflating the Onslaught points, i.e. a measure of impact inside the battle, either by focusing on trying to spot as many tanks with the radio mast at the start, or maybe they were trying to secure the SPG command as much as possible, or just make sure that they're not the first one to go in to a degree. It's still better than ranked, but it's not perfect. And I feel like the system is way better than the chevron-based system in ranked. So massive thumbs up to Wargaming for creating an ELO system inside World of Tanks. So now let's move on to the things that really sucked about Onslaught. Firstly, one of my points from the good is also going to be brought up in the bad. And that is, because the battles are shorter, the games just felt less epic, less back and forth and fulfilling. Honestly, I played hundreds of games of Onslaught over the last month, and not really that many of them that I would truly want to feature on YouTube. Even the battle that we just saw at the start, that was one of the better games that I had, and from an Onslaught perspective, it was impressive. It was kind of like the perfect game. I managed to do, nearly 6,000 damage. That's killing at least 2 or even 3 out of the 7 players on the enemy team worth of hit points. But from a narrative or from an exciting perspective, these 2 or 3 minute battles on average were just so lackluster and disappointing. You don't have those scenarios where one team goes in with 3 tanks, but they lose them all, but then they kind of play defensively, they rock up, and then that forces the enemy team to have to attack, and then maybe they can break that and create the counter-attack to then have epic showdowns at the end. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some epic showdowns in Onslaught. There were some 1v1s, 2v2s, 1v2s, and even 1v3s, usually when people have got low hit points at that stage of the battle. But that's the case in the random queue as well. But even those didn't feel so epic, because it felt like it was just another 1v1 or just another 1v2. They didn't feel rare like they do inside the random queue. And from that, honestly, the hundreds and hundreds of games of Onslaught that I played, I just felt like I was grinding, and I never really felt like I was truly enjoying all of the moments. Next, 7v7 means that only 2 classes, for the most part, on the vast majority of maps, are actually viable, and that was medium tanks and heavy tanks. Sure, there was the occasional tank destroyer on Ensk. Sure, there was the occasional player who wanted to use the EBR to be able to scout out on Ghost Town and be able to get the radio and then be able to provide a little bit of vision and a little bit of support for their team. But really, I'd say at least 90% of the tanks in Onslaught were mediums and were heavies. That's 2 classes out of the 5 classes in the game. Tank destroyers, light tanks, self-propelled guns, all absent from the class-based combat which World of Tanks is meant to be. And it's one of my favorite things about World of Tanks is the class-based combat. If I want to play a game where I'm just playing with the same capabilities as my opponent, why wouldn't I go play a game which is frankly more skill-based, like Counter-Strike? The more Wargaming removed the variety from their competitive game modes, the more that they actually alienate their player base from being able to play them. Lots of players are artillery mains, or only play tank destroyers, or only play light tanks. And if you were to do that in Onslaught, quite often your team is probably going to report you. And quite rightly so. Self-propelled guns are in such a tragic state that if you pick a self-propelled gun in Onslaught, you're practically making it a 6 versus 7. And as soon as the enemy knows that you've got a self-propelled gun, because of the radio towers, they will be able to find that out, or as soon as the first artillery shell lands, because they're going to be able to see it on the map, they'll know that there's an artillery. One of the fast tanks will go and isolate you, shut you down, and probably your team are going to report you, and you might even get auto-banned just for playing your favorite tank type inside the game. I've said this on stream a few times before, that every time that Wargaming removed tanks from their game modes, they change it so it's not so much like chess and it's more like checkers. Checkers, great game, but it ain't chess. And the more pieces that they remove by making the maps either smaller, or they make the map selection smaller, or they just reduce the amount of tanks, of course light tanks aren't going to be so useful when it's a 7 versus 7. Light tanks are meant to be special, that they can hold back massive numbers of players, or that they can light up large numbers of targets for hopefully large numbers of guns on their team. And then when the light tanks are gone, there's no spotting for the tank destroyers. And then when the numbers are reduced from 15 to 7, of course nobody's going to play artillery, because artillery are meant to slow down large numbers of players, and it becomes just a medium and a heavy tank game. Next, I want to talk about that even within the 2 out of 5 classes that were actually allowed to play Onslaught, then it's the same tanks again and again. Sure, eventually people started to mix it up a little bit and just pick tanks towards the end of Onslaught. And I think with people were relaxing a little bit more, people weren't getting so agitated and angry at you if you didn't just pick what was the meta. And the meta of Onslaught was AMX M454, Super Conqueror, and probably also the CS63. I would probably say about 70% of all of the tanks that were picked were probably just these 3. And it'd be really interesting if Wargaming actually published some of the numbers of tanks and their composition types over the entire event. And honestly, it just makes it really dull that you feel like you have to play the same tank again and again and again. And it must be really painful for players out there who aren't meta slaves and who don't have these vehicles, or they're not willing to grind to be able to get them just so they can play a game mode of World of Tanks. And I would encourage Wargaming to try and do everything they can to open up the variety, possibly with targeted nerfs for the AMX M454. A little bit more on that tank, I think, the Super Conqueror, or possibly even the CS63. Next, I want to talk about forced participation. And that is because the rewards that Wargaming enabled inside this game mode, and that is a bond turbo. They rewarded everyone who got 160 wins in Onslaught with a bond turbo, as well as loads of bonds. And then players can either use those bonds to be able to get more bond equipment that you all players who didn't play Onslaught won't be able to achieve. Let me just clarify how overpowered a bond turbo is in World of Tanks. A regular STRV-103B will go at 10 forwards. An STRV-103B with a regular turbo will go at 14 forwards, and this is inside the siege mode. An STRV-103B with a bounty turbo will go 15 kilometers forwards. I wish it could go 50. And with a bond turbo, it will go 16 kilometers an hour forwards. So that's 10 to 14, 15, or 16, depending on how much of a sweaty player you are. We're talking about 10% speed increases. It revolutionizes that tank. And it's not just that vehicle. There's a lot of slow tanks in the game, like the Maus, the Jagdpanzer 100, the Tortoise, the T95, all vehicles which are incredibly very, very, very good, and their only limiting factor is their speed. And the more sweaty nerds out there that Wargaming reward, just like me, with these pieces of equipment like the Bond Turbo, which you will never get in any other way, the more crazy overpowered vehicles that these sweaty nerds will have to be able to destroy you in the random queue again and again and again. And it's no joke. I made a video as soon as the Bond Turbo came out that I thought it was broken, and it was. I slapped one on a Tortoise and I got my third mark of excellence really, really quickly. It's the same with a Bounty Turbo, really. Whack one on a T95 and I had the easiest time of my life when I was boosting everything up with all of the field mods. The more super tools they give to super players, the worse the game gets with regards to how you can be competitive. Now, the reason why I say forced participation is because maybe maybe this is just me, but the way that I feel about games is that I just want to be on a level playing field with everyone else. And so I want to have the best things because I know there are other sweaty nerds out there just like me who are going to have those best things. And if I want to be able to play against them or play with them, like in this game mode, then I'm going to have to keep up with the arms race. And so wargaming, my firm recommendation for you, if you want to have hyper-competitive game modes like this, why don't you just bring them in for fun? Why do you need to give rewards that aren't just things that make players look cool and things that actually just make them better in the game? And better in the game in game modes that players who don't want to play Onslaught then have to compete with them. And if you're a random queue player who hates Onslaught, you should actually be very angry at wargaming with the fact that I'm going to get 2 Bond Turbos, one on my main account, one on my free-to-play account, because I don't have a life. World of Tanks is my life, and I was able to play so much over the last 45 days. And so now I've got a tank destroyer that just drives faster than yours, so I'm going to be able to catch up, or I'm going to be able to get away from your TD if I was ever to meet it. I seriously think, and I'd love to hear all of like the hyper-competitive players out there, let me know what you think. Do we want to be the best because we have better tanks or better equipment than everyone else, or do we want to be the best because we play that way? Do we play better than everyone? And I think I would actually be very happy if wargaming removed all of the Bond turbos and all of the Bond equipment from the game so that they don't have this forced incentive where they can just tell us to play whatever the hell they release and force us to have to grind our lives away in events that maybe we wouldn't want to participate just because we want to stay as competitive as the rest of the player base possibly could be. Next, 160 wins. That was the requirement over 40 days. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's only 4 wins a day. Here's the thing, maybe you got a life, maybe you needed to spend 5 days away, or you had a holiday that was like a week or 2 weeks long. Okay, well then that now means that your kind of 4 games a day might be like 20 wins on the weekend. Now, while the games were fast, and you could probably get 20 wins in, depending on your luck, maybe about 6 hours, that's still a lot, right? I would estimate that that's probably about the time. I think you can get roughly, depending on how well you've been doing, about 10 wins in at best an hour, if you're incredibly lucky, or probably 2 hours. And so for everyone out there who got 160 wins, it's most likely that you've spent about 16 to 32 hours playing Onslaught to be able to get your fancy Bond Turbo. That's quite a lot of your life that you have spent. 3 waking days if you play for 12 hours a day. That's a lot of time, boys and girls, and that brings me on to my next point. 160 wins again. Wargaming! What are you thinking? Why just so much do you force us to play? Do they have a clue that, for example, in League of Legends, you have to get 10 wins over a year to be able to get the best possible reward, which is a fancy skin, the equivalent of a style on one of your tanks. That's what they require. Now, sure, games of League of Legends are longer. They'll probably take about 30 minutes. So 10 battles is probably going to be about 5 hours of gameplay. But that's 5 hours of gameplay over a year, boys and girls. Not 16 to 32 hours of gameplay over the 45 days that wargaming just demanded from you. So now I want to talk about the ugly, and that is Super Platoons. There was an opportunity in Onslaught to play as a 7-person pre-made, and the system would try and match 7v7s, as in Super Platoons versus Super Platoons. However, and this was more often towards the high elo, Super Platoons weren't available after they had to wait for a while, they would be pitted against random players. And what the hell are 7 random players meant to do when they play against a platoon who know each other very well? They have specific tactics for all of the maps, and they're probably all on Discord with perfect communication. Now, there was the opportunity to use voice communication in Onslaught, But I didn't really feel anyone was bothering to do it. I tried a few times in my first few games of Onslaught, and people had some potato mics, to say the least, that almost I felt like damaged my hearing with regards to the audio quality. And in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of battles that I played, not once did I see anyone else try and encourage players to join the voice chat. So Wargaming, I think that was a failed experiment. And so I would thoroughly recommend to Wargaming that Super Platoons can only play against Super Platoons. That's it. Enough said. So now I want to go on to the really ugly point. It's really boring. Onslaught, at least for me, after a few hours, became incredibly boring for a variety of reasons. Number one, small map rotation. There were only probably about, I don't know, it felt like about 5 to at most 10 maps inside the game mode. And after a while, you find yourself doing the same thing again and again and again and again because it's what works for you, and you become experienced at how you play the map, and it's best to just keep doing it. At least I ended up climbing fastest and getting my most wins, and at the end of the day it was just to be able to get this bloody game mode over and get those wins by doing what I'm good at and what works for the map. And that made it incredibly boring so darn quickly, and I really miss jumping into the random queue and having access to 30 to 40 maps. Next, it was super boring because you can only blooming play 2 classes inside the game mode. Where are my lights, my tank destroyers, even missing an artillery, just to be able to spice things up a little bit? And then within those 2 classes, you're playing the same tanks again and again and again. I'd probably play the CS63 on 4 of the maps, and then I'd play an AMX M454 on the other 2, and then maybe I'll throw the occasional 60 TP or an AMX 50B into the mix if I just feel like I'm really bored, or occasionally like a Progetto. Honestly, I think I probably ended up playing maybe 5 or 7 tanks tops, and when I wasn't inting playing the T100LT or the EBR and having my team berating me for not picking a medium tank or a heavy tank, it just got pretty ugly quickly. And I can imagine this is incredibly stressful for players out there who don't have access to all of the fancy tanks with all of the fancy equipment, because you'll feel like you're probably letting yourself down, let alone your team down, because you didn't have that vehicle set up fully. Next, I think the tank picking was actually really boring after a while. It was fun, but eventually you just felt that you didn't have to adapt. It wasn't a case of, oh no, the matchmaker just put me in on Himmelsdorf in a light tank, but at least there's a light tank on the enemy team. Let's see if I can have more of an impact, and how can I still be useful? And just like we saw in my video yesterday with a charioteer in the worst possible matchmaking, sometimes it's when you're put in those unfortunate situations that you have the opportunity to have the most awesome impact. And that never really happened. I could pick myself a Cranvang when I got onto Live Oaks, or was it Westfield? I always get those maps confused. And I never really had to adapt. And I guess games are boring when you stop having to learn. And eventually, you're not really learning so much in Onslaught. You're just repeating the same thing again and again and again to be able to get your grind on. And then finally, the radio and self-propelled gun commands forces players to go to the same place again and again and again on these maps that should feel so big, but because there's only 7 players, but they just don't. These maps felt the smallest I think they've ever felt, purely because you're forced to be able to go and compete for the radio tower, or you're forced to be able to compete for the SPG command to be able to stop the heavies from being able to roll into the cap circle. And the radio tower itself ended up making the system so that what's really the point of a light tank? There's no point of having the fog of war and not knowing what all of the enemy vehicles are, when on some of the maps you could be able to just get into a radio tower and see what they were all planning within the first 20 or 30 seconds of the game. All of the variety gone, all of the depth gone. I just really felt like I was playing some kind of lobotomized version of World of Tanks, where sure, it was fun to go in and blow off a little bit of steam, but could I play that for hours? Could I play it for days, weeks, years and still enjoy it? No, I was pretty much done after a few hours or a couple of days of playing. And then it was the very ugly 160 win grind to be able to get through. And I felt like after I was about 80 games in, well, I'm halfway there, I've got to commit. And honestly, Onslaught, I think it made me more salty over the last couple of weeks than probably I think ever before in playing World of Tanks. And so all in all, to conclude, I guess Onslaught just isn't my thing. I don't like the smaller scale battles, and I don't like playing the same tanks again and again and again. That's not why I got into World of Tanks 10 years ago, and I think it's probably why a lot of people are still playing it after all this time. But until Wargaming remove this, and they remove this, they've got players like me trapped. I want to be competitive. I want to stay in this arms race so that I can be in the same capability as to what other players could be. And so Wargaming, if you want to make these very bespoke game modes for arguably a small subset of players, I would implore you to please give them rewards that don't change their impact inside the random queue, your bread and butter game, which props up your player base, and maybe I'm bold in saying is the main reason why we all play World of Tanks. So now I want to give my brief view of what I'd like to see next. And I've only got one point, and that is I want to see a 15 versus 15 with the ELO system that Wargaming have just shown in Onslaught, with lots of maps and also with no abilities. Honestly, it's been really fun to play with and against decent players. It's one of the best things towards getting towards the high end of ranked, and I'd really like to see what the ELO system would look like in a 15 versus 15 setup. Over the years, so many players have been asking for skill-based matchmaking inside World of Tanks. Well, I tell you what, this Wargaming, now you've got the system in place, this would be the easiest thing in the world to be able to test in a ranked scenario, even if you were to create like a beta test version like you did once with the 10 versus 10. And so there you have it, ladies and gents, boys and girls. That was my opinion on Onslaught, and I'd really like to hear what you thought about the game mode in the comments down below. I've heard a lot of people who have been saying it's one of the best things they've ever done in World of Tanks. If you're one of those players, please let me know in the comments down below, and also say why it was one of your favorite things you've ever done in World of Tanks. And also, what do you think about the longevity of it? I'd be very interested if you found yourself getting more bored of it towards the end, or if it was just as much fun at the beginning as it was towards the last few days of playing. Anyway, really hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And yeah, let's have a good old discussion in the comments to try and give Wargaming as much feedback as we possibly can, because this is where your money's going. Your money is going into development of these game modes. And every time that Wargaming puts your money into development of these game modes, rather than putting into things that maybe you actually enjoy in World of Tanks, it's important to give as much feedback as we possibly can so that Wargaming doesn't waste our hard-earned resources. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.